Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we begin a series revising neo-realism. Italian neo-realism was incredibly important for global cinema, and people kept thinking about it. How can we revise it? How can we do something that is it, but also something different? Today's film is from 1949. It received an Academy Award and 2 prizes at Cannes. It's titled The Walls of Malapaga and was directed by René Clément and stars Jean Gabin, the Humphrey Bogart, as they say, of French cinema. So what does it have to do with neo-realism? We'll be talking about that after today's screening. We have with us an expert on Italian cinema and culture, Alessandra Galassi. Now, take this opportunity to visit Genoa in 1949 with Jean Gabin in The Walls of Malapaga. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. You've had the rare opportunity to see a film very highly regarded at the time of its release that disappeared for many years, and we're happy here to be bringing it back to you. Just one little thing to be said. What you actually saw was the Italian release print of the film. This is how Italian audiences would have seen the film. Even though the film references 2 languages, it was offered in Italy exclusively in the dubbed Italian form. So just a quick clarification of that before we jump into what I think is a very, very rich film in terms of its dialogue with neo-realism. And returning to City Cinematheque to talk about that is a good friend, a film scholar, a scholar of Italian literature and culture, Alessandra Galassi, who's currently a visiting professor at Purchase College, CUNY, and has a long relationship teaching Italian literature and film with Pace University. Welcome back, Alessandra.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. This is a film from 1949, and the big Italian neo-realist films, Rome, Open City, Paisan, Shoe Shine, Bicycle Thieves, they're all a few years earlier and have had great international impact. So this is a film, it's by a French director, René Clément, but it's clearly in some kind of dialogue with neo-realism. So how do you see that relationship with neo-realism?
I see in some elements that pertain the screenplay and also the visuals of the movie and the characters too. I can clearly see where Zavattini and Suso Cecchi D'Amico had, written parts that are more Italian neorealist, and I can see the parts that probably there's a little bit more French influence with the poetic realism and all their tradition. The characters are defined, and Jean Gabin is very, very French in that sense. And Isa Miranda represents one of the typical characters that you just described in the movies that you just listed, Pina from Rome Open City or Giovanna from Ossessione. She resembles that kind of woman that's been portrayed in those movies that were pretty much produced between 43 and 48. Right. So it's a clear hint of that.
Let's stick with the woman character just for the moment. And one of the things that's clear about the antecedents that you've mentioned in the other films is these are working class women who are struggling in a post-war economy, in Italy. So what about, who was this actress, just very briefly, and what do you think of her particular role in the film? What kind of function is she having in the film?
She was born in Milan at the beginning of 1900s, and she was quite famous in Italy, and then she decided to, for whatever reason, she moved to Hollywood, or at least she worked in Hollywood. And in the beginning, she was considered the Italian answer to, or response to Marlene Dietrich.
Okay.
But then the roles of a lot of Hollywood movies were not given to her for whatever reason. So she came back and she did just minor things. To tell you the truth, I know her name because growing up in Italy, I heard that name, but I could not mention any crucial, important movies that she made. And that's interesting because I believe that she was fantastic in this movie. She reminds me a lot of Calamai from Ossessione, that Giovanna character. And although I adore Anna Magnani, but a little bit of that character too. I think she was perfect for that role, and she brings this Italianità in her in that movie. And I think she could have been great in any other neorealistic movie, or even in some Hollywood, in some melodrama. And I'm not sure what happened at some point that she was not chosen.
Right. Well, and at this particular moment, it's interesting because it's an intersection in her career with the fact that this is a professionally trained actress.
Right.
Right. So this is not just capturing someone, and she is giving, I think, a magnificent performance. But she is really, and she is not a working class woman, but she is creating that particular role here. But I think in terms of the dynamics of the drama, they're going to have somebody like that, because one should remind people, if they do need reminding, that Jean Gabin is a major star of the French cinema. There is nothing obscure about Jean Gabin being Jean Gabin. Just to mention two of the films that he makes in the late 1930s. This is 10 years later, but there's Pepe le Moco and Daybreak, or Le Jour se lève, and in which he really creates a role of a kind of doomed fellow who is an outsider to society in some way. It's a signature, and so when he shows up here, what you have is something of this very Hollywoodian in one sense, or of the commercial cinema of Europe. You have to have somebody who balances against a star, who can, and she does. That's what the credit is who can really keep that balance. Because if you have somebody who has such strong presence as Gabin, and you don't have someone who's as strong as she is, then the credibility falls apart in some kind of way. Okay. So what do you think? So she falls into this this pattern. What's the importance of these kinds of women for the portrayal of Italy in neorealism?
It's big. There's an article written by Professor Millicent Marcus that talks about the Italian body politics that is a woman. And I always find it very interesting because she talks about all these female characters during neorealism, that their body represents the nation. So the way in which they act, the way in which they grow in some aspects of their life, it represents the nation, Italy itself. And I find that in this character as well. She talks about the war and the effects of the war, as well as the other characters do, as Pina does, and all the other female characters throughout neorealism. And she lives a lifestyle that is the one of a woman struggling after the war, leaving her husband, raising a kid, and reminds me a lot of Two Women also. So those strong women, they rebuilt the nation, and whatever happened to them, they've been betrayed, they've been mistreated, they've been, treated not correctly,
absolutely.
And I would say by men, but by society. That reflects how my country, Italy, was treated by the foreigners, and it's a parallel between all these Italian women and Italian characters and the history of my nation during those years. It really goes back to back, and I always found this article so interesting. And you can see it, like you can see Pina, for example,
Right.
in Rome Open City, 1945, how she dies in the middle of the movie, and then basically everything evolves around her, even though she's not even there anymore. And so the importance of these female characters is enormous. Maria in The Bicycle Thieves, 1948, she is on screen maybe 10 minutes, the entire movie, but we know that the decisions she makes are the ones that will actually be dragged throughout the whole movie by her husband,
Right.
Antonio. So they are there and they are not there, but the importance of these women is enormous in those films, and these characters are constructed and built to represent something strong, but visually we don't see them really on the screen
Right.
that much. However, Marta in this movie, she has a very, very good screen presence compared to a lot of other women during neorealism.
I think I'm going to take the moment to mention something I'm sure you've taught about many, many times, as you have taught about neorealism, and that is the whole concept of the white telephone movie. The white telephone movie was the phrase used to talk about the kind of image created of Italy by the fascist film industry, absolutely under the control of the Mussolini family. I mean, literally, the Mussolini family, itself, in which it was called white telephone because a woman would always be of this modern woman living in a kind of terrace in Rome, beautiful apartment, and the telephone rings and the maid comes in to pick it up, and it's always a beautiful white modern telephone. And this was the image that fascist Italy wanted to create of its particular form of the rebirth of Italian culture in its new identity, which had very little to do with the social and historical conditions of Italy, but was the image of Italian femininity, completely, compliant with every aspect of fascist machismo, etc. So these women in the classic films, but also Marta in this film, are an incredibly strong, riposte, saying no. We can use women in Italy as a kind of national symbol, but we're going to change what that symbol is in some important way. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They acquire an independence and a strength to rebel, to say no, and we see it throughout, as I was saying, throughout all these movies from Giovanna, 1943, to this one, to Marta. In 49, and we see how the women now can say no. They are able to raise their own children without the need of a man next to them. However, Marta, in the end, would like to have, a partner in this whole rebuilding her life. She had one, but he was probably treating her not that well, and she decides to leave him.
Right.
And these women still have the strength to look for romance, to look for some love in the disaster that the war was for Italy. These women still have such a strength.
Yeah, let's stay with her, but also talk about her and her neighbors and the community itself, because I think one of the striking features of the film, and the film was a mixture of being shot in recreated scenes in rooms in Rome, in the studios, but very much shot also on location in post-war Genoa. And this is a film that is shot in ruins in the city and in a city which is trying to remake itself. You can see the liveliness of the streets, etc. So talk a little bit about how the film portrays her and the community she's a part of, the restaurant, the neighbors, etc.
It's very interesting because there's a lot of ambiguity in how these people behave.
Okay.
In the beginning of the movie, they seem all connected. It's a community. She works in this restaurant. Everybody seems to be friendly. And as soon as they have this suspicion of her having a companion or a boyfriend, then they start to gossip about her. And but then in the end, they don't give away the information to the police. So there's this ambiguity in which we are a community, then we still know that you are not doing good things for the community, but then we don't give you to the authorities. And that happens with the woman that refused to tell the police where Pierre was, the dentist that also has this ambiguity. He works for free, but then in the end, he actually gives the information to the police about Pierre. It's so strange how all the community works around her, accusing her, but then protecting her. And it's very interesting, but the community is the part that is taken from neo-realism.
Right. Yes.
Working together in against a common enemy. That's neo-realism.
I think that's an absolutely key point that, again, neo-realism comes out of this, political, disaster, which was Italian fascism, and the way in which it was claiming to serve the people, but did not serve the people, and therefore it is now telling the truth about, one, to what degree people were exploited and were victims of it, but also the truth about the collectivity that responded and the way in which, and we all know now, 75 years later, that within those 20 years there was the Italian miracle. Yes. That Italy then joined the other modern countries of and undoubtedly and unquestionably has remained there all of this time. So that was kind of part of the charge of neo-realism, was a collective heroism of the people in their struggle to take command of their own fate, with these female characters. Yes, it is a Catholic country with a strong belief in motherhood, etc. But this is a reshaping of this. Yes. Because again, fascism used that aspect for its own ends, and this, this is this is something a bit different, and it's making a claim of authenticity. We are the real Italians. Yeah, in all of our contradictions, but we're the real ones, not the fantasy ones.
And I think that brings us a little bit to the name of the movie.
Yeah, please talk about it. There's two names, there's two titles.
There's two names. So one French, which is Au-delà des grilles, which means on the other side of the grades, the grating, the barriers. And then there's the Italian one that is Le mura di Malapaga. So Malapaga is a wall that it's not too much there. Like, I think it's not completely there right now, but it was at the port, so it was kind of dividing the city from the water. Okay. And that's why Pierre goes immediately into them when he gets off the ship. Now, the French title is more from Pierre's perspective. Right. So being trapped, being hiding something, being caged somewhere, which is not very much aligning with neo-realism. But the Italian title involves the city, which is a very specific element from neo-realism. So Genoa becomes the main character from the title. But the importance of the title in Italian is that wall had a prison on top, and that prison was for the people that didn't pay their debts. So malapagatori, which means bad payers. And it was structured in social classes. So wealthy, that debtors,
Yeah.
they were on a higher level, and common people, they were on a ground level. And this division with social classes, we see it throughout the movie,
Absolutely.
even between, specifically we find out at the end with Pierre and Marta, when Pierre opens his luggage and he has the beautiful suits and the money, so we see the difference. But it's interesting how the Italian title, it's a community title. It's the city and the people that live the city that make the movie, while the French preferred the approach from Pierre's point of view and Pierre's being trapped. And
well, and that leads us just briefly back to this way in which I think this film is some kind of negotiation between the French tradition of poetic realism, which we see in dominantly in the films of Marcel Carné, starring Jean Gabin, but also in other people, and certain aspects of Jean Renoir or Julien Duvivier, in which there's a great emphasis upon the lyrical individual experience. And characters are highly individuated. There is a social background, but the film is not about that social background in any sense. In a certain sense, the background is there not to inform us about social or historical conditions, but to tell us about what the character is feeling in that particular way. And I think the film plays with that because here we assume when we first meet the Jean Gabin character, he fits as this working class, rough fellow, etc. But there's this slow reveal that there's something very, very different about this. And in fact, he can bribe the captain and have this because actually he comes from a very different class. Her attraction to him, we see that perhaps the only thing that's changing about him is that he has these opportunities, that he now knows he's at the end of his life, and he will try to do the most noble thing he can with her. It is an act of individual redemption, which fits with poetic realism,
right,
as opposed to a kind of a collective, which we kind of see in the camaraderie of the restaurant. In that it's not a cruel owner who's exploiting the waitress. It's an enterprise. They're trying to move forward, working as the team, and with the very liveliness. I've been waiting for 2 hours to do this, but that's all part of the film's portrayal of the collectivity.
Yes, and the element that doesn't belong to neo-realism is that Pierre is a criminal.
Right.
And that's, we don't have that in, we have people that do illegal things according to the law of that time. So we have in Rome Open City, we have Manfredi, who's considered a criminal by the Germans, but not for the Italians, because he's fighting for the cause, for the resistance. But here, Pierre killed someone that was not involved in the war. So it makes
it's a personal passion. It's a crime of passion.
It is, and he comes to Genoa and he meets this woman. I don't think he gives her too many hopes. There's always this pending feeling, sense of this affair is never going to last.
Right.
Because of how he acts and how they do. And also there's this physical separation between the two. He sleeps upstairs, she's downstairs. In the bus, in the scene of the bus, they are divided by the other crowd, and she goes towards him, he doesn't go towards her. And then at the beach, they have all the rubble, so it's not a smooth path, walk of the two. And then the last time that we see them together, the police arrest him. So there's a lot of elements that let us understand that this couple will never really be united. Even the daughter in the beginning is against him. So there's a lot of elements there against this story to become a story, a love story.
Right. And one should say that we haven't really mentioned René Clément, the French director. One of the reasons he's going to be having this project is that his first film was The Battle of the Rails, which he began as a documentary filmmaker, and then his film was about the way in which the Battle of the Rails, the workers, and this is historically true, the railway workers in France helped sabotage the German use of the railway. So he's being brought in on the one hand because of this whole documentary background that matches in one sense with the neo-realist aspect. But at the same time, he brings a poetic realism, and then he becomes a very effective, but I would say classical French studio director. The film that he will make that makes him very famous right after this is Forbidden Games, Jeux Interdits. After this, so he's finding his own way among several styles in here, and it's unsettled, I think, in the film, but. I programmed it because it is a film about how people begin negotiating with the neo-realist tradition. What can you take and use for your own purposes, or what do you bring to it in some way?
Yes, they use the child as well as a very important element in neo-realist movies, and she has an agency. As a kid that we also see in Rome Open City with Romoletto or Marcello, or we see in Bicycle Thieves, La di Bicicletta with Bruno. So the children is a very important element of neo-realism, and we see here that Cecchina has a complete agency.
Okay, I think we're going to have to end here on the idea of children with agency, in Italian neo-realism, and what that's also kind of suggesting about what the hope of the future could be, even in that. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Great. If you'd like to know more about City Cinematheque, this series in particular, or generally about City University Television, it's no surprise. You can visit our website and find out a great deal. Visit www.tv.cuny.edu. There you're going to find more information about City Cinematheque, more generally all of the programming here at City University Television. You'll also find ways to communicate with us, and please, we do like hearing from you. Something else there these days. You'll find the way in which you can get the CUNY TV app, and you can begin streaming. Yep, that's what you can do. So please visit www.tv.cuny.edu. Alessandra, always a pleasure chatting with you about things Italian and cinematic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. And thank you for joining us here today on City Cinematheque. And please join us in the future as we continue our stroll through the archives of film history. But for now, it's goodbye.